Bring up puede significar mencionar o introducir un tema, criar o educar a alguien, levantar o mover algo físicamente, ascender o mejorar la posición de alguien. Es importante prestar atención al contexto para interpretar el significado adecuado.
Leaders, but that's part of our when I bring up issues like human rights, there's some tensions there.
Of trust there, I think, is really interesting. And you bring up the media. We are one of many institutions.
Point that you bring up that, in the past, the problem was kind of scarcity, getting access to this sort of information. And now
another fun thing that I want to bring up here, and some of you watching might think I'm crazy or
even when it was going to bring up opposition or
both. I'm sure you're going to bring up some tuning.
Bring up my credit reports instantly on my screen.
And it'll bring up a tutorial of what you need to do.
It's interesting to bring up the government of Israel and how people are.
There's some tensions there that when I bring up issues like human rights.
But the reason I bring it up is
team. The reason why I bring up the three-part narrative is this is where we are. I mean, and why do I bring up?
And when I bring up this with my friends, we often.
Before I bring up our final speaker.
Another idea I bring up is perhaps we should demand track records of.
I bring up Apple deliberately because, and I'm hardly the first to point this out,
and the reason why I bring up radio is that I think radio is a great example of how
that when you go into the military, and this is why I bring up Flight 93.
I'll bring up that one person because
polling has lost trust in trust there, I think, is really interesting. And you bring up the media. We of trust there, I think, is really interesting. And you bring up the media. We are.
Point that you bring up that, in the past, the problem was kind of scarcity, getting access
in the area. And by doing this, we are creating buy-in. People, when you bring up the riverfront, they're like, oh.
Even actually, if you bring up the question.
And then the second notion that you bring up, right, very much we think about fixing it for individuals.
Is when you teach your classes and you bring up the topic of, the divorce revolution and single families and single.
Like you bring up, so what do you think about God?
You bring up the feeling that people who
and poetry is an incredible outlet to express how you feel.
And you bring up a great point that you're also being heard.
Yes.
Here is that because you bring up the American Jews and Israeli Jews.
That's interesting. What, Kelsey, you
I think one of the other things you bring up, and you said it almost exactly what I was.
Would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview?
Are not professional cap. The big issue they bring up has to do with, as technology can do more and more.
Who have popped the swim bladders when they bring up fish from quite deep because the pressure is really an issue.
Someone sees when they bring up with their camera.
The things they bring up from their community as they talk to one another.
And they bring up wheat and corn and grains and all of this. So it's
to address is a point that they bring up about my qualification.
Bring up their telescopes and the public gets to take a look.
And these plant medicines, what they do is they bring up things in the
remote. If they bring up the question, it's fair game to respond why working remotely is important.
This could mean they bring up random things about their day, interesting comments.
But they're told we bring up that issue about health that we really need to talk about. And
the country as a whole is first. We bring up our kids better than this.
And we bring up amazing veteran performers.
That's what that is. If we bring up the lights a little bit, and we're going to take some questions. I think we actually have the...
if there is so much evidence out there, everything we bring up, they can go and search and.
How do you bring up the gate? The way we bring up the gate is we show the kind of clients we work with.
Ourselves. So people that come after us, people that we bring up, I think of.
And we bring up that they should be getting a colonoscopy for a cancer screening.
We bring up this verse because it's true. Because God says, if you date somebody who
about, folks are often relieved when we bring up suicide.
And by sharing it with somebody.
And we have some rules about who we bring up on stage. And here are the rules. First,